thanks so much for coming. Thanks for being here. My name is Venkat. I'm part of the archives at NCBS. And on behalf of our entire team, I want to thank you for being here. I also want to give a shout out to Madan for introducing us to Anurag and for making this, at least initiating the idea of the talk many months ago, I think. And I'm glad this is working out. And of course, a huge thank you to Anurag for agreeing to do this. And I look forward to the next 2 days. So I'll be very quick, just to give you a couple of high levels. In the rare event that you haven't been spammed by the archives before, we are a public collecting center for the history of science in contemporary India. And we've been around as a public center for the last 5.5 years or so. If you have time, please join us for refreshments after this talk and also for a walkthrough of our exhibition spaces and the archives later this evening. We have the curators of our ongoing exhibition. So that will be starting just after this. But also, more importantly, you might find some intersections of music and archives at the archives at NCBS. So take a look at the catalog. If you find some entries, if you don't, come ask us and we'll show you some entries from the catalog if you're interested in this area. We also invite people to just come. If you're on campus, do come by. If you have never been there, come and take a look at what we have and what we house. And if you happen to know things in those areas of work that we process, we also welcome volunteers to help us describe some of our material, which is otherwise hard to understand for us novice archivists. Okay, so it's my deep pleasure and privilege to introduce Anurag to you here today. Anurag was born and raised in Lucknow, a Lucknowi as he has also just described, before graduating from IIT Roorkee in 2002. This was followed by a master's and a doctoral degree from the University of California at Berkeley. Since 2008, he has been a faculty member in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at IIT Kanpur. Anurag's academic interests are in the broad areas of theoretical solid mechanics, where he is primarily interested in modeling complex mechanical behavior of solids using advanced mathematical methods. More recently, and that's the area that we are looking at, he has developed a serious interest in learning about Indian musical instruments, both from a scientific and a historical viewpoint. And today's talk is titled Structural Design of Indian Musical Instruments, Historic and Scientific Perspectives. I should clarify, of course, that it's a two-part talk. So part 1's today at this time, same time tomorrow for part 2. So I hope you stay tuned and come back tomorrow. With that, thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Venkat. It's a pleasure for me to talk here, and so it's an area that I mean, as Venkat said, I got interested more recently, and it has somehow led me to work in this area from various viewpoints. And what I have been fascinated about this area is that I have a reason to look into not only scientific aspects of what I'm going to talk about, but aesthetical aspects, historical aspects. And there are, I mean, when you talk about a musical instrument, there are it's a multi-dimensional thing. You can just focus on the social aspects of musical instruments. I mean, the construction of a musical instrument and the anthropological aspects associated with it. But so it's a very multi-dimensional object to look at. What I'm going to do here in these two talks is something very specific, something that I have been focusing on, and that's why I feel more confident to talk about it. It's something very specific, and that specific thing is the following. I'm going to look at some very particular instruments. For example, this talk is going to be essentially about Tānpurā, which of course is the soul of Indian music in many ways. And tomorrow's talk, I will focus on percussion instruments. In both these talks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to point to you something that many of you may already know. I'm going to point to you the essential features of what makes these instruments what they are. See, an instrument is a lot more than what these features are. I mean, it's a mechanical object, but and what you hear is a certain sound that comes out of this object. But my idea has been to understand what is the essential feature in these objects, which is kind of delivering this sound, this desired sound that we are associating with the object. So first idea will be to identify the essential design features. For example, in Tānpurā, that is what I'll do. Trying to understand why are these the essential objects. I mean, so I'll give you some results that we have worked out. Essentially, the physics of these features. What role these features play in terms of physics of these instruments, the musical acoustics. So that is the first part of the talk. In the second part of the talk, I get into something which I became very curious about, that okay, I mean these are the design features which also happen to be very unique. They have literally no parallel in world culture, in any other world culture. And that gets me into thinking that okay, I mean within Indian mindset, within Indian culture, where do they come from? What is the history? What are the historical origins of these features? And that is the second part of the talk that I will get into. And please feel free to stop me wherever you want. I mean, I'm around, so you can always catch me afterwards also. But let's get started. So why I am getting into this, just a brief motivation of this broad study that I'm trying to get into. So for me, these design features that I'm going to get into, they are signatures of a very unique musical design culture. These are all design interventions which have clear scientific roots, and obviously with an idea of delivering a certain kind of sound. That is always there. But in terms of design, in terms of science, they are mechanical intervention, mechanical design intervention. So for me, when I look at a musical instrument, I started to look at a musical instrument in this multi-dimensional ways. Of course, I mean these are instruments which produce a certain sound. But you know, there is all this aesthetical aspect of it. I mean, instrument as a material object in its own right. Then, you know, what has made this instrument produce the kind of sound that it is producing? Of course, to me, as a applied mathematician, something that attracted me primarily to work in this area was when I started to discover that there are some amazing problems to be solved. Problems which are actually extending or challenging the existing literature in musical acoustics and structural vibrations. And that started fascinating me, that okay, I mean this is a brand new sort of source of new problems for me, and I will point that to you. I mean, and that kind of really got me into it, and I mean that also kind of really pushed me into this area. And again, as I said, I mean, it really gives me this opportunity to become more interdisciplinary. I mean, it has given me opportunity to go systematically into history, to systematically get into ethnomusicology. I mean, it's a very deep subject to get into, and eventually, I mean, the broader goal is to get some kind of whiff of Indian natural philosophy. I mean, how were these guys thinking about these instruments when they were coming up with these instruments, or the basic ideas behind these instruments. Okay, so starting with Tānpurā. This is Tānpurā, and this is an amazing picture for, I think, for some of those who can recognize this picture. This is basically a generation of daggers sitting all together, and it's the rarest of rare pictures that you will see these guys all coming together. And except for Zia Mohiuddin, who is holding a Rudraveena, all of them are holding Tānpurā here. They always prized their Tānpuras too much, and these are also very well built Tānpuras. Many of these Tānpuras, the gold actually was sourced particularly from Africa at one point of time. These big gourded Tānpuras. I'm going to talk more about gourds. So Tānpurā, just to sort of initiate, it's in a technical lingo, it's a long neck lute, but it has also features of a stick zither. It is not really a pure lute-like instrument. I mean, something like a sarod would be a sarod, or a rabab would be a lute-like instrument in a more stricter terms. I mean, so on one hand, it does have that feature of lute. I mean, a body with a neck, but it also has this feature of a stick zither. Stick zithers are essentially instruments with a danda, like Rudraveena, you know, standalone danda as a resonator in itself. And in Indian subcontinent particularly, we have had very rich tradition of stick zithers. Another place in the world where you will find very rich tradition of stick zithers is Africa. They also have very rich tradition of stick zithers. So to me, Tānpurā is a amalgamation of these two ideas, a lute and a stick zither. And to tell you the historical origin of this instrument particularly, it cannot be taken beyond early 17th century. There has been absolutely no evidence of Tānpurā existing before that. Okay, I mean this purpose was played by, and there's some basic things to it. I mean, you know that there are 4 strings to Tānpurā. They're tuned most commonly in a particular way. And what Tānpurā does, and I think this is not an audience, I probably have to motivate that. What it does is it establishes a very firm harmonic basis for a musical performance. So it is not merely a drone. What people, sometimes you will see people calling it a drone instrument. I think it's a very simple kind of word to use for an instrument like Tānpurā. It kind of gives this very rich basis, and that is why, I mean, there is a reason why these guys sort of build upon their whole practice on this instrument. Okay, so this is just a very preliminary introduction to Tānpurā, assuming that most of you sort of know of this instrument, but just to sort of also, just to set a context. So I'll play some sounds of Tānpurā alone. Then Tānpurā, actually the second one that I'll play is a very small part of a Dhrupad thing being sung by Rahim Fahmuddin Dagar. Who is this person here? And then third piece is a small piece played by Zia Mohiuddin Dagar Sahab. Just to give you an idea that how, I mean, what do I mean by Tānpurā forming a basis for a musical performance? Just to give you that idea. So I'll do this first, then I'll get into the structure of Tānpurā, the parts of Tānpurā, and go ahead with the talk. But the sound is the output. The sound is what we associate this instrument with, right? And this is the signature of the instrument. So let me see how do I play this somehow. Yeah, I'm not able to. Yeah. No, it is there. Yeah, it is there. It was not showing up here. Yeah. Okay, so I have to see there. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to do this maneuvering. Okay. This is, as you know, Tānpurā sound. Very, very rich in overtones. So the first thing that comes to your mind is just this sound, which is deeply meditative, sound which is very rich in overtones. But exactly what that means is what we'll come to, because one question that I asked and answered partly was, what is this sound? I mean, and how is this sound, for example, different from, so you can never produce this sound in, for example, in sitar or in veenas. I mean, instruments which may look very similar, but they're not. I mean, you will never be able to produce this sound in those instruments. So what is it in this instrument which produces this sound? This is something which we'll come to, but just to sort of, so just is Rudravina. Okay, so just to give you an idea of what Tānpurā sound is and in what way it provides a canvas for the colors of the vocal music or the instrumental music to sort of shine forth. Okay, so parts of Tānpurā, just to most of you might have seen the instrument for sure, but I'm assuming not many of you have seen the instrument up close. This is the instrument as it looks. It has 4 strings, so 4 tightening knobs. Essentially speaking, there is this big resonator that you see below. So there is a big tumba. It is called tumba. This tumba is essentially built out of these dried gourds, kaddus. And these kaddus are grown specifically in this region in Maharashtra called Miraj. So this is where these kaddus are grown, dried. And then what you do is they're cut, and this portion, this bottom portion of the tumba is coming from the dried gourd. They have to be dried in a particular process. There's a particular process, and that actually also makes these instruments very delicate. You have to handle them with care because they will break easily. This is the upper part. So this is the tabli. So the upper part of the tumba is a wooden plate. It is not a flat wooden plate. It is a slightly curved wooden plate. And this is how it's interesting that certain work has to be done on the interior of that tabli. I mean, it's this roughening up of the interior apparently is an important thing. And the other thing I want to so this tabli is put on top of it. This is also hollow. So this danda is also hollow. In fact, this is one resonator connected to this other resonator. So in fact, the way you see it, you have these two acoustical cavities. This is one acoustic cavity, one resonator, like more like a semi-sphere, like heavy sphere kind of thing, coupled to a long cylindrical resonator. And this is this is the first sort of identifier and a unique feature. This is not, lutes don't have this. Lutes don't have hollow dandas in general. Okay, so hollow dandas is very much a signature of Indian instruments, and this kind of arrangement is of course is a signature of some of these instruments. The other designs, so I'm going to point out three of them. Okay, the second one is this bridge. Okay, so you all see this bridge. These bridges are again very unique to Indian music. You will, for example, you see that this bridge is not finite. It is not a sharp bridge, unlike what you see on a violin or on a guitar. Those bridges are sharp. These bridges are finite bridges. I mean, they're curved finite bridges. In fact, they're curved differently in the two directions. The curvatures are different in the two directions. This differs. I mean, for example, the bridge on sitar is differently curved. The bridge on Saraswati Veena or Rudra Veena are curved differently. So the curving of the bridges is a different exercise on different elements. I should also point out that there are Indian string instruments where the bridges are not curved. For example, sarod. Those happen to be those instruments where the bridge is kept not on a wooden plate but on a stretched membrane. So those are the instruments where the bridge, for example, sarod, sarangi. Sarangi is also an instrument where the main strings are attached to a bridge which is not curved. It is a sharp thing. But here we have that. So this is the second design feature that I would like to emphasize. The third and the most important design feature for Tānpurā are these threads that you see, which go below. So when these strings are coming onto this bridge, as you can see. And this is a close-up of that. Right below these strings, you see these threads. I mean, these pink things are these cotton threads, essentially. What they do is essentially to raise the string slightly. Okay, and these are called jiva in the literature, and rightly so. I mean, jiva essentially coming from the soul. So this is the life of Tānpurā. I mean, it's not just removing these threads. If you slightly disturb these threads, then the sound of Tānpurā goes away. This is the final tuning of Tānpurā, where the final tuning of Tānpurā comes in, and this is the sort of the most delicate part of tuning of Tānpurā. So this is called jiva. So these are the three features that I want to just point out to you. And going forward, I'll motivate certain scientific aspects, and then also talk about where I could find the earliest mentions of these features in the literature. So that will be the rest of the talk. Okay. Oh, I should also mention that not all Tānpuras are made up of gold. For example, Tānpuras which come from Mysore and Tanjore, which are beautiful Tānpuras. They have very intricate carving on top. Those are wooden Tānpuras. They are not made up of. So if you go to a shop and particularly ask for a Mysore Tānpurā or a Tanjore Tānpuras are supposed to be most beautiful. So they are made up of wood. Okay, so the scientific study of Tānpuras very informally started by C.V. Raman. So I just wanted to put this slide because of our proximity to him in some sense. And so this appeared in 21. In 1920, he had just written his paper on tabla, which I'm sure many of you know about, and I'll talk a lot more about it tomorrow. And it was tabla was his first paper that he was writing on an Indian musical instrument. Before that, he had already established himself as a very prominent researcher in musical acoustics. He had written tons of papers on violin, on harpsichord, on whispering galleries, but he had not dabbled into Indian musical acoustics. So I don't know the reason of how he got into Indian musical acoustics, maybe because of Calcutta, some exposure there. So in 1920, he gets this major result in tabla, which I will not mention here, that's for tomorrow. So something which really becomes famous, and it's until today, it remains as one of the most important results in musical acoustics in the last century. I think maybe motivated by that, he started looking at other Indian instruments. But unlike the tabla paper, this paper is completely heuristic. He's just saying things. He has not done any experiments. He is not sort of really saying anything scientific. He just sort of comes up with the most important thing, and I think the most cited thing from this paper is actually these two figures. And it kind of becomes clear of what the jiva is doing. So this is the side view. The thread is actually raising the string slightly in this manner. But he doesn't comment on what it does, why is it like this, where should it be placed, things like that. The only thing he mentions in terms of science is that having such curved bridges violates what is called the young Helmholtz law. And that is quite natural, because these are very different boundary value problems. See, what we often learn as young physics students, that you take a fixed boundary condition string, and you strike it in the center, for example. So if you strike the fixed string from the center, modes which have nodes at the center will not appear, because you are activating the exciting the string from the center, right? So the nodes which do not vibrate at the center will not activate. But that is not the case here. Even those nodes, for example, you have a string on a sitar or any of these instruments, and you pluck it at the center, even those modes will get activated. And the reason obviously is because the length here is not fixed, right? Because as the string vibrates, the string is kind of wrapping and unwrapping on the instrument, and I'll show you some interesting videos where you will see this wrapping and unwrapping. So clearly this classical Young's Helmholtz law is getting, so that is what you see. So this essentially is the scientific content of this very short paper. Okay, so this is this is how I started to do some of these experiments. I just removed all the other strings, just kept one string, and took some high-speed camera images, and I will show you the results of that. And we also did some mathematical modeling. So how were we idealizing? So we idealized the bridge as a rigid object, and some idealization of the actual picture. So this is something which is interesting that I will show you. So this is the bridge from the side. So these videos were taken from the side, right? This is the bridge. This is the string. And this is the jiva. This is the thread. Here we have only one string, and my interest here is to understand how the string interacts with the bridge and how it differs in the two cases. So I'll play these videos, and it becomes immediately clear of what is happening, at least visually what is happening between these two cases. So I think I should be able to play both of them together. So if you focus on the first video, maybe first. So this is like sitar or Saraswati veena or Rudra veena, where we don't have jiva. Here, what the string is doing as it is vibrating, it is, if you focus your attention here, it is kind of smoothly wrapping onto the bridge and unwrapping. Okay, so this problem is what is called in the mathematical literature is a problem of a vibrating string against a unilateral constraint. Right, so this is a unilateral constraint that the string cannot go beyond this constraint, and this actually still remains a very challenging problem. It has been solved analytically only under very specific assumptions on the interaction of the string and the bridge, and this was solved in 1990. So it still remains a very challenging problem mathematically to sort of work it out. Here things are very different. Here you can see that the string is no longer wrapping or unwrapping smoothly. It is more like an impact. And I mean, just focus your attention on this string now, right? It is more violent actually. This is what is happening in Tānpurā. So just from looking at these two pictures, you clearly see that there is something very different happening, and this is, I mean, this thread is not there just, you know, just as a fanciful thing out there. I mean, it is really changing the way the string interacts. So I will show you what it translates into in terms of frequency spectrum and all, and you will immediately see. So before we come to that, I also want to point out that what is this moving boundary, I mean this string wrapping and wrapping on a bridge is actually doing in terms of vibration of a string. These red lines are essentially just the locus of the string as it's vibrating. So if you have a fixed string, and if you pluck it at the center, this is how you can trace the path. Okay, it will just go up and it will come down. This is how the string vibrates, right? But here, because the length is not fixed, the length is changing. This is how it looks like for the case without jiva, and this is the case with jiva. Of course, here you don't find much difference. But what is interesting here actually, the reason I want to bring out this picture is this looks very similar to the kind of picture you see when you bow a violin. So when you bow a violin, then the string motion is something like this. Okay, and this is what, this goes back to the notes. So this is, yeah. This is just the motion, this is just the transverse displacement. So you are just seeing the string, so this red line is basically string. It's just looking string in the space, how the string is vibrating. Okay, so it's just the amplitude of the string. Okay, so this is how spectrograms look like. So without jiva and with jiva. Of course, here the pluck is very little. I mean, this is again a very interesting point about Tānpurā. Those who play Tānpurā are told from the very beginning is to play Tānpurā such that Tānpurā should not know that it has been played. So you have to, ऐसे बजाओ कि पता ना चले Tānpurā. So you have to play it delicately. So this is very important for Tānpurā. I will show that the pluck has to be mild. Okay. So when the pluck is mild, you see that without jiva, you're not really exciting a lot of overtones and like the structure. On this axis is basically the frequencies, and this is basically how the frequencies, the spectrum evolves in time. On this axis, it is time. Okay, this is the various frequencies. Okay, but of course with jiva, you see a much richer structure. Okay, I'll come to a slide where you'll see this more. The main point that I want to come to is here actually. Okay, so this is a very actually, this is a very insightful slide. So this is nothing but, let me tell you what this is. Various colored lines are various modes, right? And I'm sure, I think all of you understand what modes are. When a string vibrates, its vibration can be broken down into several modes. Fundamental mode, then first, second, third, fourth mode. Okay, so these are frequencies of various modes. Okay, so I'm here plotting 15 modes of frequencies. Okay, you see how those modes are evolving in time. Okay, so of course they're all dying down like eventually. What happens when you're in the case without jiva? The fundamental remains strong. Okay, the fundamental is what you're exciting. So for example, where you're plucking and things like that. The mode that you are exciting, that always dominates. Right? So that is why, that has to be there in the instruments which you play. So for example, when you're playing sitar, you excite a certain string to play a certain note. That note will always dominate. Obviously what happens, you see a lot of richness of these overtones. And that is the signature of Indian sound, right? We always have our string instruments having a overtone laden sound. And that is this whole cloud there. But there is something very different which is happening here in Tānpurā. And this is a signature of Tānpurā. In Tānpurā, you see that the fundamental is still this bold red line. In Tānpurā, what happens very soon in time, the fundamental gets drowned in the sea of these other overtones, and there are other overtones which actually pick up. So, in other terms, there is a significant energy transfer from this fundamental mode to these higher modes, and this energy transfer is happening because there are these nonlinear interactions acting at the bridge level, which is not happening for the fixed string case. Okay, so these nonlinear interactions for the case without jiva is giving you this kind of overtones, but for example with jiva, it becomes like this. And this is what is Tānpurā. The fundamental is no longer important. So what you play, see, we are just playing sa and pa. What you play no longer becomes important. Like eventually, after you do a few rounds, what emerges out is something more. Okay, so this is something that, that is something that we found something very quantitative, a very quantitative way to understand with jiva and without jiva difference. Okay, just very briefly coming to this pluck thing. In Tānpurā, with jiva, if you have a higher pluck, you see that the structure is lost. You don't see a lot of overtones. You have to pluck it mildly. Okay, so plucking is very important in Tānpurā. Okay, so that was the first part. I'd like to now quickly get into the second part of my talk, which is, yeah.
Do you know what determines this time interval that it takes for the fundamental to run into the
No, I don't understand that. As I said, analytically, these are still very challenging problems. I am very interested in that, but actually that is one of my prime interest. But it is something which is proving to be difficult. But it's a very interesting question.
So when you pluck one string, all the other three start vibrating.
Yeah, but here these results are just one string.
Yeah, but have you seen?
Exactly. And there is strong coupling between the strings. Yes.
That is through the bridge.
Through the bridge and the instrument.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. So it's much more than this. Yes, much more than this.
Yeah, but only the fundamental doesn't get transmitted in that case, because we can hear that the other strings just show the overtones.
Right.
Not really there.
No, they're not fundamentals. But the fundamentals get drowned, right? It will happen for each of those strings.
Okay.
And Tānpurā you really start hearing Tānpurā after a few rounds. So after a few rounds, then you start hearing. So that's why after a bit of time, you will see this kind of something else emerging, not what you have played.
Yeah.
That is what is Tānpurā. Okay, and that is why tuning is very important. You have to. That is why only the gurus understand, how to really bring out what has to come out after the fundamental is drowned. So that is important. Okay, so now I'll just focus on, yeah, please.
One question. So, in something like Surbahar,
Yes, sir.
does the structure is the structure different, or is it that it's just more sympathetic string? That's why there is more sustenance, or like the fundamental drowning in other thing in that sense.
See, this fundamental drowning is happening because of jiva, and that is not there in any other string. Yeah, that is not there in Surbahar. Right, but other aspects are other structural features that are there in Surbahar.
Jiva and Tānpurā originally conserved, or it was a
But where did this come from? That is what I'm going to talk about. That historically where I found it was first mentioned. So I'm going to talk about these two very peculiar venas, which actually, if you go around looking into old Indian temples, you will come across some of these. And it is in these old venas I found some past of these features. And so I've worked in detail in these two venas. I'll talk about a bit of my journey as I talk about it. The first veena I want to talk about is Ek Tantri veena. Ek Tantri veena is mentioned in text in musical. So India has had a very rich tradition of musicology text, starting from Natya Shastra. So Natya Shastra is essentially a text on aesthetics, but it also has long chapters on music, dance, musical instruments per se. Okay, it has a full chapter on drums, for example. Okay, but after that there has been a lot of other texts also. Datiram, Bradeshi, between before 10th century. These kind of instruments, the instruments with the stick zither, this danda, they appear late in the scene. The older venas, so if you asked me about the oldest venas in the Indian subcontinent, I'll show you a sculpture towards the end of my slide where you will see. So the oldest string instruments in India were either harp-like or they were lute-like. They were called Chitra veena and Vipanchi veena. Okay, and they're the oldest. These danda, the instruments with the danda, they come much later in the scene, and I will show you the oldest of that. Ek Tantri veena is not the first of these stick zithers. Okay, Alapni veena is the first stick zither. Ek Tantri veena has been described very well in texts like Sangeet Ratnakar. Some of you might have heard of this text. Sangeet Ratnakar is a very authoritative text on music and music-related studies, and it has been described so well that we have been able to dimensionally reconstruct the instrument. And I will show you that CAD reconstruction also, because it has been described precisely. I mean, the material, the dimensions, everything. Okay, but it is not just Sangeet Ratnakar. I'll show you. There is a whole array of texts that we referred to, and we were able to reconstruct. The only problem in this reconstruction, I mean, there are several problems. I mean, for me, I am not a Sanskrit scholar, so I always have to look out for people who understand language, particularly Sanskrit, well. But that is not all. You also have to have a sensibility for music. So sensibility for music, sensibility for old Sanskrit, and an ability to sort of combine these skills to sort of read these texts. So that has been the biggest challenge for me. Okay. So for this work, I collaborated with a Sanskrit scholar, Chaitali Dangrikar, who stays in Kanpur, and we read these texts and we kind of deconstructed some of these texts. So just to summarize, I will show you. I mean, this is actually the same sculpture. This is Saraswati from around 11th century. This is kept in Lucknow Museum. It's just a sketch of that, so that you can see the features more clearly. This is a one-stringed veena. This is not ek tara. Many people confuse ek tantri veena immediately with ek tara. It is a proper. I mean, you can play melody on this. Okay, it is. So it has this one string. It has this gourd, tumba attached there. This tumba is much smaller than what we see here. This is actually made up of bottle gourd, loki, that you say. It has this big bridge. Big finite bridge. The finite bridge also appears on Alapni veena, which is older. I'll come to that next. So Alapni veena and danda, this danda is much larger here. It is this danda which is retained on Vichitra veena and Rudra veena. That is where you see this big danda. Okay? It mentions this finite bridge and it has a jiva. That is the important thing. So it is on Ek-tantri veena, to answer your question precisely, where we see mention of jiva for the first time. And it is for that reason alone, I think, that in Sangeet Ratnakar, Sharan Dev mentions right at the beginning of the chapter on Tatvadya. He says that Ek Tantri veena is the mother of all veenas. He gives it the most important position among veenas. It is a fretless veena. Okay, I mean, fretted veenas came slightly afterwards. A very important feature that is described in Ek Tantri veena is that there is also mention of a small metallic plate kept on the bridge, which survives in Saraswati veena. In Saraswati veena, there is a metallic plate engraved on the bridge. So this also, I have not seen mention of that metallic plate also before Ek Tantri veena. But Ek Tantri veena, you can find a lot of these features which are there in the modern day instruments. Okay, so although the instruments have changed, but what I'm trying to communicate here is that certain essential features have not changed. So as if, the world is changing around, but there is something essential which is still preserved and which is kind of the essence. So the essence of Indian sound, as we hear it, is in these parts. Like in this danda, is in tumba, this bridge, jiva. Okay, and this instrument is lost, but these features survive. These are some other very beautiful evidences. This is not very clear, unfortunately. So this is the oldest painting I could find on Saraswati veena. This is a Jain miniature. So in India, the miniature painting tradition began in Gujarat, like among Jains. And this is a Jain miniature painting from 12th century. So this is very clearly Ek Tantri veena. There is a bridge also here. This is another version of that. Here the hand movement is missing. There the portion of the danda was missing. This is also from 12th century. A sculpture which was dug out from somewhere in UP. Now it is in San Diego. This is another sculptural sort of evidence where you will find veena. This is Veenadhar Shiv. So Saraswati is one person who's always holding veena. So if you want to see like evolution of veena, you just find out Saraswati. From several hundred BCs, for example, there is a Barhaut sculpture kept in Calcutta Museum where Saraswati is playing a harp like veena. And you can go to Japan and there is a version of Saraswati which has traveled to Japan and she's playing biwa in Japan. So it's very interesting. Saraswati is always playing the contemporary sort of instrument. And but the other person who's playing string instruments all the time is Veenadhar Shiv. And Vinadhar Shiv particularly has become very popular after 12th century in South India. You will find very nice bronze statues of Vinadhar Shiv in South India, but this is from North again. So I'll talk very briefly about what are the sources of this kind of study. The primary sources of our study are the text, and these texts we have been focusing on these texts between 12th century and 15th century. Sangeet Ratnakar is the most detailed of these texts, but in Manas Ullas also. In fact, there is a text slightly before Manas Ullas called Bharat Bhashan. It is from 11th century, and that also has descriptions of these So that is the earliest. So I would say that Bharat Bhashya is the earliest description of Ekantri Veena that I have found in literature. Before that, I have not found mention of this instrument. Also in sculptures, I have not found a sculpture before 11th century where I find Ekantri Veena. Also, I have not found sculpture after 14th or 15th century where Ekantri Veena has been shown. So that way, Ekantri Veena has been completely wiped out, okay, from literature and from paintings. This is, I mean, here also there is Ekantri Veena. I don't know how many of you can spot it out. It's this little guy who's playing Ekantri Veena. It's for just or nothing. I mean, it is clearly Ekantri Veena. Okay. So of course, I mean, once you read these texts, it gives you a lot of confidence to identify. So one of the things that I really enjoy doing is when I go to museums around the world, I mean, where they have these Indian sculptures, or go to temples, I really try to challenge myself to identify the Veenas that they are there. Because everywhere they will just write playing an Indian Veena. I mean, that is, in my opinion, very, very kind of like insulting in a way, because which Veena, right? So that is something, that is for me, that has been a big success. So just to run through it, and this is the kind of work we did. We have very precise dimensions and all. We did the CAD drawings. This is how things looked like when we tried to reconstruct it back from the text and things like that. You see. So here the jiva was of bamboo. What these texts mention, this is of bamboo, and the string is gut string. Most of the earlier, I mean, many of these earlier strings are gut strings. Okay, sheep gut, things like that, cow gut, and things like that. This is the metal plate I was talking about. So the bridge, this jiva is kept on the metal plate. Okay, and this is how things are. I'll show you some other pictures. This is the other side of the instrument. This is how the tumba is attached to the thing. And there are no nuts and bolts. Everything is just tied to. I mean, there's some very interesting work about knots also. Because I mean, for those who are interested in knot theory, one can learn a lot about knot theory from these musical instruments. Because they're talking about some very interesting knots to tie these objects to the rod. So I have actually learned a lot about the knots from this work. So this is how the whole instrument looked like. This is our reconstruction. Of course, I want to do actual physical construction, but someone has to sponsor me. No, I'm not asking you. Right? But so this is another. And the reason I placed this sequence, because I first studied Ekantri Veena, and then we were also trying to look into the fact that which was the oldest stick zither in Indian context, and that turned out to be Alapni Veena. And Alapni Veena is different from Ekantri Veena in many aspects, and this is what I would like to summarize. But for this work, actually I worked with a brilliant person whom I value as a good friend for life, Achantya. And he actually helped me to not only read these texts, but also to appreciate, language is not a very, is not just a material object. I mean, it quickly translates into so many other things. And Achintya was able to sort of help me appreciate, go beyond the written word. And so what this Veena is about, I mean, first of all, let me just show you this. Alapni Veena always shows up with Vinadhar Shiv. So this is the Shiv that I was showing you earlier also. And it's a very simple instrument. It has this small danda, much smaller in size, both length-wise and the diameter-wise, mostly made of bamboo. Ekantri Veena, the danda is not bamboo. It is wood, and they were kind of drilling these long tunnels in wood actually. They talk about it. Here it could be wood. There is a curved bridge at one end. So they talk about curved bridge, okay? And this is this you can see. Okay, I don't know where it is. So this curved bridge you can see in the earliest of the sculptures. The Alapni Veena can be seen in sculptures as old as 5th century, 6th century. And I'm going to show you that. Okay, so it's very old. Interestingly, Alapni Veena survives in very different forms. For example, Alapni Veena still survives in India, in Odisha, as a folk instrument called Tuila. Okay, I think I mentioned it here. So that is still. It used to survive in Tamil Nadu also as a folk instrument, but somehow it has disappeared from Tamil Nadu. And it survives in a very big way in Cambodia. In Cambodia, it is almost the national instrument of Cambodia. Okay, and so there it is. I mean, it's a very big thing to learn to play this instrument in Cambodia, and it's played exactly in the same way. Okay, I mean, the instrument looks the same. I mean, we don't know how it was played. In fact, the playing technique of Alapni is something we could not sort out. I mean, me and Ashante, we spent many months trying to understand. Actually, you can see the way the position of fingers are here. It's very intricate. I mean, you have to use some fingers to push the tumba. So here the tumba is a half-cut tumba. So this is a half-cut tumba which is pressed on your chest. So your body kind of becomes the resonator. So these instruments are what are called the instruments with chest resonator. So it's a stick zither with a chest resonator. So here your body is the resonator, right? So some finger has to push the resonator, the other finger has to kind of press on the string, and you're plucking the string from the other hand. So we were not able to, although there are detailed descriptions of these things in the text, but we were not able to sort it out. Okay, so I'll just show you some pictures. I'll just show you some pictures of where it appears. So this is from Ajanta. Okay, this is the oldest painting evidence of Alapni Veena. So this is 5th century. This is Alapni Veena. So this is a Gandharv. So there's a band of guys who are kind of descending from heaven to attend Buddha's ceremony. So this is a scene from that. It's very well preserved. Okay, see. So this is where the Veena is there. But in sculptures also, this is again a very early sculpture, 6th century sculpture, Veenadhar Shiv. Actually, many people tend to misunderstand this. So in many texts, we found that people sometimes interpret this as so Shiv has this kind of form of this male-female duality, right? So in many places, because of the tumba, they misinterpret. But when you have that form, there are other features in the Shiv which also distinguish. But one can be in a rush to kind of interpret it like that. So one has to be careful. But it is there, and here is where you can see that finger movement. Again, very complicated finger movement. And a lot of these sculptures. I mean, there is a whole array of these sculptures that, I mean, much more than Ektantri Veena. I mean, you just have to look around. I mean, you'll find tons of them. Not only in India. Interestingly, I found a lot of Alapni Veena in Southeast Asia, in temples in Angkor Wat and many Southeast Asian temples. Lot of evidences for this. So I think just because I'm giving a talk here, I thought I'll show you some evidences from around you. I mean, not so close to you. This is from Badami. So this is from again a very early sculpture, but again you see Ektantri. This particular sculpture, in places I have seen being referred to as that dual form of Shiva. This is much more closer to you. I think you can drive it in a few hours. This is, I think it is close by, right? So this is on a roof. This is on a temple ceiling, and again this is Ektantri Veena. This I'm not so sure. This I'm not so sure. The others are all Veenadhar Shiv. This I'm not so sure. Yeah, that's a very good question. So that is all. There are many more. I mean, you can always. I have a whole bunch of these pictures. But just to summarize, I mean, I think you could see where things could be there for as us, for scientists, for you to as a scholar to pursue. Of course, there are several interesting problems in structural acoustics. The whole problem of moving boundary value problem for a string with a jiva. I mean, these are unsolved problems. So for me, I mean, that is a big challenge in front of me. I mean, how do I start working out? I mean, I have written some numerical algorithms and they work, but I want to understand them deeply. That is a big challenge for me. I mean, so these instruments give me that kind of material. translation of text. Most of these texts, the musical instruments part, particularly, for example, Sangeet Ratnakar, has been translated, except for the last part. So Adhyaya Library brings out Sangeet Ratnakar, and they also bring out translation of Sangeet Ratnakar. Unfortunately, there is no translation of the fourth part of Sangeet Ratnakar, which is where the musical instruments have been described. So we had to do a lot of work in terms of translation. So translation is not there. What also, I mean, something that I'm hoping to understand in long run, maybe 15-20 years, is also to understand what Madan saying that, I mean, how string instrument has evolved in the Indian context. It's far from being clear how we have gone from harp to these zithers, and how we have gone from these zithers to Tānpurā. I mean, right? I mean, how have these evolutions been done? Obviously, a very exciting thing of this kind of research is the actual physical reconstruction. I mean, you can go to West. I mean, I was in a bookstore in Edinburgh a few years ago, and they were selling Greek harp. I mean, you can buy a Greek harp. I mean, just like that. I mean, they really mastered this. They really understood how these instruments, how their ancient instruments looked like. So I think to me that sounds very exciting, that if we are able to at least, I'm not saying that they will be exactly like that, at least in some way, at least to some scientific correction, to be able to reconstruct. Repair and preservation. I mean, if you go to museums on musical instruments, I'm told there is a very good museum in Bangalore also. I was recently in France, and they had a very good museum of musical instruments. None of these musical instrument museums talk about the physics behind these musical instruments. And there is such amazing physics behind these musical instruments, particularly in the Indian context. It is not just a fixed string vibration. You have to be told that. So I mean, I think it is very important for us to understand these things in order to preserve these things, in order to better understand science and society and history through these instruments. So that is what I'm trying to do. So this ends my talk. So this is what I was talking about. This is a door lintel which is from 5th century, Gupta period. This is found in a place called Pavaya, which is close to Gwalior. This is kept in Gwalior Museum. If you go to Gwalior, they have a beautiful state museum. It is kept in the courtyard, not very protected. This is a very, very well produced, I mean, so I don't know, some of you may have heard of this guy called Anand Kumaraswamy. He was a guy who kind of introduced people to Indian art history. He had written a couple of papers on the Indian veena, and essentially he was talking about Indian harp veena. And this is the image that he was using in that paper actually. So this image is fascinating. There are several instruments in this image actually. So let me just take a minute to point out those instruments. This is the Indian harp. This Indian harp is very different from Greek harp because it doesn't have a post. The Greek harp has this post which connects this end to this end. And this is actually still a mystery because in harp the strings are under extremely high tension. So how will this kind of structure will not buckle without a post? So this is the problem with Anand Kumaraswamy also posed, and I'm yet to get an answer. Interestingly, this harp also survives in Burma. So there is a Burmese harp, which is basically this harp. It went from India. I mean, it's a well understood route.
But does it have a post?
No, it doesn't have a post. It still survives. So we have that structure. Just someone has to sort of, exactly this harp survives in Burma. The other instrument that you see here, thankfully this part is not lost, is a lute. So this is a lute. It looks very much like sarod, right? Actually, you can even see tuning pegs here, right? And you can even see the hand here. If you look closely, just playing in very similar position. I don't know exactly how it was constructed because these details I could not find. There are no older texts which are describing this kind of instrument. But there was a lute-like instrument. This was called Chitra Veena in Natya Shastra. This was called Vipanchi Veena in Natya Shastra. So if you ever come across these terms, there are more instruments. There are these drums that I'm going to talk about tomorrow, and there is this another drum here, played like a tabla kind of thing here. So there are these drums. There are of course playing cymbals, and there's a flute also somewhere. Yeah, here we have flute. This is flute here. There are these drums, cymbals here. So it's a very rich image. This of course is not the oldest. You will find older images mostly in Buddhist sculptures. If you go to Buddhist caves, you will always find very similar looking sculptures, very similar looking kind of feature. So these kind of features are around. But with this, I'd like to end, and I'll continue tomorrow at the same time, but focusing more around drums. Okay? Thank you. Yes, Sanjay.
Thank you so much, Anurag. I see any questions. I'll start with Sanjay.
That was a fascinating talk. You talked about it just a little bit towards the end, but this speciation of instruments that we see, going from some of these to now like this whole menagerie of instruments. When did that happen? In what time frame did it happen? And what do we know about that speciation process?
You see that actually what happens is that after 12th century, you also see a different kind of text appearing. These texts were written by people who were employed in Muslim courts. And what these guys were doing, maybe they were kind of asked to do so, they were preparing these texts which on one hand had sort of music coming out from Arabic and Persian world, instruments coming out from that world, but they also contained description of instruments from the Indian world. And I think that is where this amalgamation started to happen. So I think a lot of these, I'm sorry, my time is up.
Cancel.
No, I know. I need this. I need this coordination because my hand has to be here, my eye has to be there. So it requires serious cognitive skills.
Many of these descriptions, they bring up Amir Khusrau as one of the people.
That's myth. So, for example, tabla I'll talk about tomorrow. Sitar also. Most of these are myths. Actually, in none of his writing, these things are found. Although there are other texts, there are other brilliantly written texts by people in Muslim courts which survive, where you do see this attempt of bringing things together. And I think a lot of these instruments, so I think Tānpurā, for example, sitar, Tānpurā, it's all in that line. See, you have Rudraveena, right? Something like Rudraveena, right, existing. But you also have then these Persian instruments, right? So in some sense, I can see how things are kind of evolving. But what always interests me a lot, that in all this transition, the basic features remain. So that is what I really feel amazed about. It is not that when they go towards sitar from something like a veena, actually they called veena, every string instrument in Indian past has been called veena. So please don't think it as Saraswati veena, everything is veena. So what interested me, what is fascinating is that although they were changing instruments a lot, but somehow they were still retaining these features. It is not that they were taking finite, the sharp bridge from a Persian. None of the Persian. So there is a string instrument from Iran which is also called sitar. But it has a sharp bridge. It is a very different instrument from this actually. So clearly and obviously look-wise it is similar. But in terms of features, again if you focus on the features-wise it is very different. So for me, when I look at a string instrument, I immediately look at the bridge first. That is for me is a defining feature. Then a lot of other things are a consequence of this socio kind of setting, socio-political setting in which these instruments are being played. But it is a fascinating thing. It's yeah.
How much of the effect, how much the sort of the way one feels the Tānpurā is because of the complex auditory response of our ear. Sort of the fact that it takes a while.
No, right. A lot. Actually, it's not Tānpurā, any sound.
Yeah.
For example, it's something which is very well known about. So, musical psychoacoustics is a discipline, right? So, something very trivial, just a trivia about in that discipline. One of the first things you learn in musical psychoacoustics is that you really don't have to play the full octave. You just play a few notes. It actually constructs the fundamental. So actually, it's very interesting. If you read a good book on sound theory, they define sound as a perceptory thing. So they differentiate between sound and sound waves. For example, they give this example: a tree falls in a jungle. If there is no one to listen to that sound there is no sound there. Sound is what you perceive, and that can be very different from what is the source. So what is being played and what you hear. They can be big differences, but so actually there was this musicologist B.C. Deva, who actually was a Kannadiga. He is the only person I know, and several years ago, who at least made some attempts in trying to answer that, but it is far from understood. So it's not some, but obviously it is. I mean, ear plays a big role in every sound.
It's interesting that you mentioned psychoacoustic setting the mood.
Yes.
You enlighten me more on that. How does the mood get set up?
No, I'm on very slippery grounds there. Let me not
It's very
slip. Let me not slip there. Let me just say a few.
As soon as you played, it set a different mood in the orchestra.
I mean, this is as good as I get. I mean, you perturb me slightly here and there, and I slip. So it's very tight. I walk a very tightrope in these kind of discussions.
Very interesting talk, and having been somebody who was trained in Carnatic music, I never actually played a Tānpurā myself. Right from the time I was trained, we have just been working with the electronic Tānpurā.
Yes.
So to see the structure of the Tānpurā is very interesting. In the Ekatantra, you have the Dumba on the top, the upper portion, and in the modern, the Tānpurā that came later, we have it on the bottom part. So what difference does it make for the Dumba to be on the top versus on the bottom?
See, I think it is more about playing styles. I will not really say that Tānpurā has a tumba in the bottom. I mean, it is a different structure, slightly different structure. I mean, if you see, for example, Rudraveena, I don't know if you have seen a Rudraveena, I think that is a closer comparison. Rudraveena, because earlier Rudraveena was also played in a very similar style as Ek Tantri was shown. I mean, if you have seen Asad Ali Khan playing Rudraveena like this, I mean, it's like, Zia Mohiuddin changed it. He made the modifications and it became heavier and had to be played like this. But in Rudraveena also there are two tumbas. And obviously, it is quite something. I mean, in Rudraveena, I am told, it takes years just you have to learn how to hold the veena. Actually, in many of these instruments, a major amount of practice is just to hold the instrument. That is a big thing. And then so now coming to the point of placement of tumbas. Actually, even in some of the like for example, sitar. I mean, there are these versions of sitar where you also attach this tumba on top. Right? I mean, there are gharanas which use the sitar where you attach the small locky tumba on top. So I think it is a manner of gharanas, but in terms of sounds, I cannot give you a very precise answer. But I would guess it will have to do with how things resonate. I mean, how the sound, because finally the sound we are hearing is coming from the body of the instrument, not from the strings. We are not hearing strings directly. I mean, if we were to have only the strings, we will not hear anything. Strings, the amount of energy strings transmit is very little. That is why we need these resonators to transmit energy. So these resonators is where I am actually trying to understand. That is very scary. Okay. No, I was looking at that and it turned red at some point. It reminds me of these conferences, right, where they're very particular. Two people who stand in one corner and stare you and. So that is it. I mean, it's how these resonators work is something I'm onto. This is something I'm trying to understand right now. That how the bodies, what roles these very interesting resonators play in the sound that we hear. But I don't have a very definite answer on how the placement. See, sometimes in Rudraveena, there are these veenas in which there is a third tumba also in between. So there has been a lot about these tumbas. Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned that the violin has similar overtones.
No, I didn't mention overtones. That structure of the string vibrating.
Ah, okay, yes. The
Yes,
structure
yes,
of the string vibrating.
yes,
But
yes.
violin has a very sharp bridge.
Yes, it has a sharp.
So then, how does the structure remain the same?
No, but not the overtones. I mean, I was only comparing this. I was only comparing how the string vibrates. I mean, in space, if you see the shape of the string vibrating, then that is the kind of shape that is similar to this. But I don't think the frequency spectrums are like that.
But with the sharp bridge,
Yeah.
you still see the string vibrating the same way?
No. For guitar bridge, for example, you will see that the first picture just up and down. But it doesn't translate. I mean, you can't. I mean, the translation into frequency spectrums are not analogous to that.
So just there's a question here, and then we'll come back to you.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so with the acoustic features of these of this instrument, does it have any relationship to the system of music that you have? For instance, you mentioned Iran, the acoustic features there are different.
Yes.
Is it related to their features? And then if so, how do you explain?
No, it is very interesting. For example, see, you're talking about resonators, right? For example. So in terms of resonators, if you think about tumbas, so India is not the only place where tumbas are used. Africa, I mean, some beautiful stick zithers in Africa, where they have, I mean, they're kind of a kind of hybrid between stick zithers and harp, because they have strings going like this, and they use these big tumbas. I mean, so I mean they're there also, but those sounds are very different. Of course, their sticks are not hollow. The sticks are just a danda. So I'm not sure. It's a very good question. But these tumbas, I would love to say that these tumbas are very Indian. But there is this other example that there are more African. Actually, in African subcontinent as well in many Indian subaltern cultures, you see dried gourd being used a lot. And some of you might have seen lamps and bottles made out of dried gourd. So, I mean, it's a good question, but I think it has to be approached systematically. On the other hand, there are many other features. See, right? For example, in this picture itself. I mean, if you see this picture, actually, there's some very interesting. I mean, many of these instruments. I mean, you see a bowed instrument. We can talk a lot about history of bowing also. It's a fascinating history of bowing. Which also has very interesting Indian connections. But in these instruments, I mean, in this picture actually you see a mixture of this Persian influence, and there are some Indian influences here also. But it is, I mean, I think at some point of time, I think it is, one cannot focus too much on these differentiators. I think it becomes a new culture. I think that is what, for example, Hindustani music, I think it might not be right to say that it is pure. I mean, I think this, I think seeking of one particular lineage, and I think that is also part of the richness of that particular system. That it has this sort of things coming from various sources. Yes, syncretic.
I'm just thinking about because you mentioned that the bridge is concave, right?
Yes.
And since they were using leathered strings, right? Would it be because they wanted some tuning stability? Because the jiva, in my mind, looks like a roller, so they are converting a fixed joint to a roller on a concave surface, which would essentially maintain.
No, but not exactly, right? Because the string is still wrapping and wrapping. I mean, there is still that unilateral constraint. That constraint is still there.
Yeah.
See, that constraint is not going.
Yeah.
So it's not that the boundary condition has gone from fixed to roller.
Okay.
That constraint is a very important thing. Unilateral constraint, that string cannot go beyond this constraint, this bridge.
True.
That is the important thing.
No, I mean, I'm talking in terms of just so that, because as we know with leathered instruments, keeping them in tune even during mid play is a very difficult.
Tānpurā goes out of tune. No, but I think that is mostly because of poor, I mean, in my opinion. I mean, you would rarely see a Western instrument going out of tune. I mean, how often you would see a violin going out of tune?
No, but that's steel strings, right?
No, but still, I think, in my opinion, I mean, this could be a very, very subjective opinion. I think it is a lot to do with workmanship. Okay. I mean, nowadays we use steel, metallic strings and.
So I remember the leather, even like for example, tabla.
Yes.
Keeping it tuned within the duration of a concert itself.
It's a challenge. It's a big challenge.
So I was just, when you were mentioning about the concave bridge.
Yes.
That maybe.
No, I've not thought of it from this perspective. It's an interesting point.
Thanks for this wonderful talk. So I was curious again about this when you showed those high-speed movements of the jiva. So the motion with the jiva became very erratic, and then rounding off the front.
Right.
So I was wondering, do you have any like dynamical systems perspective to this? Like, is there some kind of signatures of chaos which is emerging also? Whereas without the jiva, it's very, let's say, some period 2 or something like this.
Very interesting. I think he sits next door to me in Kanpur. So I think why don't you look inwards? Let's do that.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's talk about that.
Kanpur,
Let's talk about that.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure.
Yes.
So I have a very trivial question. Do we know anything about the etymology of Tānpurā?
Yeah, I think it's not a trivial question. Actually, etymology of all these names is a very interesting subject because there is very little basis. Very few of these instruments have their names going somewhere. And the reason is because, again, instruments are not things which are kept in labs or very secluded from public, right? These are social objects. And the name is a very important thing, right? Name is everything in many ways. So the name has to kind of please the social consciousness. So the names are very, I mean, you cannot, people, there are all kind of theories. So the more purists, the more Sanskritists will say that Tānpurā comes from this Tambura Rishi, because there happened to be a Rishi called Tānpurā. I mean, it's all very far-flung. I mean, I would not get into that discussion at all. These older Veenas, which are mentioned in text, their names are still, I mean, one can get into that. But these modern day instruments, because a lot of air has flown, a lot of water has passed. Between which these instruments have been developed. So names always, right? I mean, the name always has to reflect the first thing the government does. I mean, half of UP cities now have been renamed, right? So, so names is a very important thing, right? To appeal to the public. So I think, that's my view of it.
Because apart from Ektara, I think, which is self-explanatory.
Well, yeah, exactly.
And maybe I missed it, but what was the difference between Ektantari and Ektara?
No, Ektara has none of these features. Ektara has not, it doesn't have a curved bridge, no jiva, no big tumba. So Ektara in fact is mostly a drone instrument. It's giving you this background sound. But Ektantari Veena is a melodic instrument. It's a full, you can play full melodies on Ektantari Veena.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot for this talk. I had a question very similar to what Siddhartha asked, is that in the high-speed movie that you showed, in the case of Big Jiva, there was a lot of
a lot of disturb. Yeah, exactly. Hitting the bridge. Hitting the bridge impulsively. Yeah. Impulsively.
So I'm just curious that if you have something like Ektantari Veena where you have the Jiva, and if you're playing something with mean where you are holding down the string, you're probably not having that vibration, right? You are wrapping this.
I know. Yeah, you're right.
How does that does that mean that putting something like Jiva in a sitar won't have the same effects because you play differently?
Yes. I completely agree with you. That's why, there is always a long description in these texts about playing of these instruments also. That is a more difficult part of the text because that needs you to be very familiar with the musical culture of those times. So I think some of these things could be probably answered there, but it is a very valid question and I don't have an answer to that. It's a very valid question.
Maybe that will be the last question and we'll take a pause.
So there's position of the jiva.
Yes.
I believe that is a function of several structural elements like the tension on the string or the structure.
So I'll tell you. Thanks for reminding. I forgot to mention this. So this is what we understood, and this is finally what we saw verified in Ektantari Veena's case mentioned in text. What they always say that the string should be played, the jiva should be placed such that the string is at a grazing contact with the bridge. So you adjust the string such that, or you adjust the thread such that the main string just touches the bridge, grazing contact. That is what is and that is what we also saw in our simulations. That is what thankfully, so if I would be giving a scientific talk, this is the first thing I'll show in the slide. This is the experimental evidence, and then I will sort of prove my result. But that pressure is not there. So, but what you're saying is I'm not. So that is the answer. That is clearly the answer. Obviously, when people are tuning, you would never see them looking at the bridge and seeing whether the grazing contact. It is their ear. And Tānpurā tuning is anything but trivial. It's actually a lifelong exercise. The people who know Tānpurā know that tuning at Tānpurā. Many people actually say that tuning at Tānpurā is actually finding yourself. It's like that. Okay, I don't know what that means, but that is what they say. Don't come back to me on that. So, but that doesn't seem to be a function of anything as such, right? Just to come back to your question that way. So that seems to be a very fixed thing, that no matter what is the case, and because you have different strings in Tānpurā, those strings are of different material also, different tension. but the jiva is always at the graze. I mean, it's such that the string makes a grazing contact.
The reason I asked is that the position seems to be changing like every day, which is, it's never in the same spot.
No, because it slips, right? It's just a cotton thread.
No, I mean like on day 1 if it's there, on day 2 if I mark it, say few days later it won't be the exact same position.
Yeah, it will slip. Yeah, it is.
No, if I tune it, it won't be the same position. Like the determined position of the jiva after tuning will be different. And I thought that is because the weather conditions change
Of course, I mean weather effects and I mean right. I mean these are not very stably built systems, and I think that tuning element of Tānpurā on stage also is a very much part of the performance. I mean many people view that as it's like tuning the viewers to get to the. I mean it's a part of that thing, but it is there. I mean it slips by all the time. Actually, just coming back to jiva, we also did experiments with using other materials. If you are conscious, I mean, if you got curious about it. So, for example, we used a silk thread because we found mentions of silk thread. We also used a bamboo thread as mentioned in Ektantriya Veena, right? But none of that worked for Tānpurā. So I think it is the right amount of elasticity for the cotton thread, but it kind of works in other instruments. I mean, we used a metallic thing also, a thin wire, but none of that worked. The cotton thread is what works. So this also is not something that I'm very interested in. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Anurag.
Thank you.
Go join us for the questions outside and go join us for part 2 tomorrow on percussion. Thanks so much.